Hello, I'm Rabbi Tobin. Hello. You're at B'nai Shalom in West Orange. For the folks who are online, today's the 30th of July. I don't know what happened to July. I woke up this morning and I looked to do something on Wednesday or something, and I realized I wouldn't be able to do it until August. Then I realized it is August, and that's not good. The summer is coming to a crashing close already, it feels like, but we'll enjoy a little study. So we are in the middle of the 3 weeks right now. It's the period of time between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av, which on the Jewish calendar is a time of mourning and a time of sorrow, an appropriate time for study, because on the 17th of Tammuz, the siege of the Temple Mount, we talk about it being the siege of Jerusalem, but it's really not the siege of Jerusalem. The Romans are fully ensconced within Jerusalem prior to the 17th of Tammuz. They've been there for years. But there's a certain historical development that's happened that we're going to talk about this morning that made the Romans feel that they had to do a siege to close off the Temple Mount itself, which culminated after 3 weeks of siege with attack and destruction and the slaughter of everybody up there and the loss of Jerusalem as our own city for nearly 2,000 years until the establishment of the State of Israel. So it turns out to have been one of the critical turning points in Jewish history, and for the subsequent, almost 2,000 years, Tisha B'Av has been a day of fasting and a day of mourning for us. As strangeness in time would have it, the first temple was also destroyed on Tisha B'Av on that exact day. That's not necessarily a midrash. That's, multiple sources having put that together prior to the Second Temple's destruction, and the date of the Second Temple's destruction is testified to by historic sources. So that's actually real. So Tisha B'Av is the day when both temples were destroyed. Our exiles began. The response to exile is only tshuva and return. And so the class is about destruction and resilience, not because we're trying to anticipate, God forbid, another destruction and we should be resilient for it, but we should learn the lessons of how our ancestors dealt with destruction in a resilient manner and how that created the Judaism we have. What lessons you draw from that for yourselves in your lives, you're going to draw for yourselves. So we're going to deal more with destruction. I was going to do destruction last week, and then I was going to talk about institution building and what the Sanhedrin before the destruction was and the Sanhedrin after the destruction and the creation of the Mishnah and some of those things. It was going to be more leisurely. Instead, we're really going to have to just kind of focus in on what happened and how the people in that time related to it. So pass these down, please. These are source texts. We're not going to read them in the order we have. So why don't we start with kind of dates, times, place, historical setting. Let's start with what do you know? Can we do that? We're talking about the destruction of the Second Temple. Let's just do a little crowdsourcing of information. What do you know about the timing and the reality of the destruction of the Second Temple? What was the circumstance that made this happen? Just start throwing some facts out and we'll put them all together as a puzzle. Let's start with when.
70.
All right, so the temple is destroyed in 70 of the Common Era. What's going on in the land of Israel in 60, 65, 68, 70 of the Common Era? What's it like?
Okay, war is
Occupation.
It's occupation. How did the Romans get there?
They conquered.
We invited them.
Oh,
We invited them in the first century before the Common Era because we thought it would be good. We'd get in bed with them. They would stabilize the country. They would bring resources and knowledge. The Hasmonean kingdom was kind of falling apart in infighting and so forth. And remember, the Hasmoneans came to power with civil war, so they didn't eliminate internal strife, among our people. So there was a lot of stuff going on, and more or less we invited the Romans in, and we invited, as it turns out, the fox into the henhouse.
but who did the inviting? In other words, who spoke for the people?
It was kind of a natural process. Like, there wasn't conflict. They didn't, It's not like one day all of the Roman ships showed up off the coast and they sacked the port and marched their armies in. That's not how they got there. They got there through a organic process of moving in and making deals with the local governors and so forth, and kind of like what China's doing on the east coast of Africa these days. If you're paying any attention, they're actually taking over entire ports and cities and everything through the debt of the countries that they build the port. The country goes into debt, they default on the debt, and China gets to own the port. There's several of them where this is happening. Right? So that's kind of how the Romans came to be in the land of Israel. By 30 before the Common Era, they're in military control, and they're determining who's on the Hasmonean throne. They're determining, pretty soon they get into determining who is and isn't the high priest. I mean, they're in charge, and it gets uglier and uglier because Jews don't like occupation, right? We don't like foreign occupation. All right, so by the year 60, there's a series of revolts that are happening against Rome. Minor revolts, major revolts. There's also revolts between Jewish groups, okay? And our best historical source for this is really Josephus. So we're going to read some Josephus stuff today. But Josephus paints a picture that by the 70, that you have four groups of people in the land of Israel when it comes to Jews. Anyone, this ring any bells? Anyone want to throw out names they've heard of? Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes,
Yeah.
one other? Not the Philistines, they're a little earlier, coastal people. The most important ones, the ones who cause the trouble that results in the destruction. It's not the Pharisees who get the temple
Right.
destroyed, it's not the Sadducees who get it destroyed, and it's not the Essenes.
No,
It's door number.
Sakari.
It's not the Reformed Jews. Bad you. Bad you. Stop that. Jeez. I can't even teach a class without getting in trouble these days.
Yeah.
Is it Hasmonean?
No,
Oh, I love this. I should open a Jeopardy. Not the Sakari, they run down to Masada.
The Jews that were going to
there were zealots, though.
Not the early Christian sects. What'd you say?
There were zealots.
Zealots. There's a group. That's the umbrella group. The Sakari are within that. The Zealots. He refers to them as the Zealots. The Kanaim with a kuf. The Zealots are the political rebels. So understanding who these groups are. Pharisees are us, rabbinic Jews. When we say our rabbis of blessed memory, and the New Testament in the Christian circle says the Pharisees, lawyers, and hypocrites, we're talking about the same people. Obviously, they're going to have a negative spin on the Jewish institutions at the time, and we're going to idealize our blessed ancestry. So the Pharisees are the rabbinic Jews. Pharisees are defined by observance of Torah as their primary identity in the covenant. So they are students of Torah, teachers of Torah, observers of Torah. They fully participate in the Temple Mount, in the sacrificial system, the holidays, and everything else, because all those things are in the Torah, right? The Sadducees, big picture, are typically much more the Temple Mount folks. It's aristocracy, it's priestly aristocracy. There's a whole swath of society that's probably not as worried about, I don't know, maybe dwelling in booths or whatever, but they're on the sacrificial system. And that the Sadducees are really invested in the priesthood. The Levitical system was huge. It's the economic heartbeat. It's the driving engine of the economy and the society in and around Jerusalem. The tithing system, all that kind of stuff. Sadducees are kind of specialists in that. So they tend to also be economic aristocracy in some ways in the city of Jerusalem at the time of destruction. Essenes are separatists. They may or may not be the people down there by Qumran. That's a matter of academic controversy. Depends which scholarship circle you're paying attention to. But the Essenes certainly are separatists, and they tend to be more austere. They have their aesthetics, meaning they deprive themselves of certain bodily pleasures as a spiritual discipline, etc., etc., etc. They are not real players in the conflict in Jerusalem because worldly matters, priestly matters, Torah matters, and political matters are exactly what they're not focused on. So they tend to clear the decks. So they're focused on their own community. There's literature that seems to talk about a war of light and dark. They may or may not have a belief in some kind of a savior or a Mashiach. They are intense in their purity laws. They're fairly intense in their sexual restrictions and separations. Their aesthetics in the desert, for the most part.
They were on Masada.
They were not on Masada. The Sakari were on Masada. They were more, people think they were the Qumran sect, or people like that at the Dead Sea Scrolls down in that area. Masada and Qumran are not the same place.
There was no king at that time.
There was a king.
Who was the king?
King Herod, we would be talking about in the
No,
early
I
100s.
mean a Jewish king.
He's a half-Jewish king.
He was king of Israel, right?
He was king of Judea. There is no Israel after the destruction of the northern kingdom in 722 before the Common Era. This is 8 centuries later. There's no kingdom of Israel at any point during the Second Temple. It's the kingdom of Judea because it's the tribe of Judah that had the first temple destroyed, went into exile, and they're the ones who came back. So it's the tribe of Judah in the area of Judah in central Israel that becomes the province of Judea under Rome, and the people of that area are known as the Judahites, or in English we say Jews, and the religions of those people is known as Judaism. Right? So Judaism is the descendant religion of Judea, which is a second temple reality on the map.
Last all the other tribes.
Gone. 722, the northern kingdom's destroyed. Those tribes never surface except in various, kind of mythological, modern.
So we're all
that-
descended from Judah?
We are all descendants of Judah, of Judea. Judaism is the growth religion from our ancestry in the land of Judea.
So no one's going to claim any ancestry to any tribe?
Not really. The only people who can claim ancestry to a tribe are the Kohanim and the Leviim, who are of the tribe of Levi. All right? But everybody was in Judea. Does that mean they were all descendants of the tribe of Judah? No, because when the northern kingdom was destroyed, you had exiles, you had refugees who came down from the other tribes and just merged into.
All tribal identity was lost.
Tribal identity is lost with the destruction of the northern kingdom, and for sure the destruction of the second temple. Right? There's no, in the second temple period, there's no tribal allegiance. Nobody's saying I'm from Dan, I'm from Yitzhakar. That's not anywhere in any of the literature. Okay? So this is a unified mix of ununified people. Right? We're defined by a name on a map, which is the Roman province of Judea. So there is a king. The king is a vassal king to Rome. We pay taxes to Rome. We pay tribute to Rome. He owes his allegiance to Rome. He goes and he visits in Rome. He has a villa. He builds Caesarea with a Roman aqueduct and a Roman theater. He speaks Greek like the Romans do. He probably dresses like a Roman. He rebuilds the second temple complex to be on par with Roman architectural standards of a grand temple, right? Which is why you have the retaining wall, which is now the Western Wall, and the huge platform up there, and he builds this whole colonnade up there. He is culturally, politically of the Roman Empire. He is the king of the region of Judea on the Roman map.
And he's appointed by Rome. He was not
He
elected by
serves
Judea.
at the pleasure of Rome. The day they're unhappy with the king of Judea, the king of Judea is gone, and that's eventually what happens. The governor of the province winds up being in charge of military law because of the sedition of different Jewish groups in the first century. In yesterday's class, we had a little sidebar where we talked about the execution of Jesus of Nazareth and the fact that that is not a religious execution. right? Ultimately, he's no more problematic in what he says than many other people who are in this diverse picture in the land of Israel at that time. He is killed by the Romans because of the political turmoil that happens, that's associated with him, and which is why the whole thing of, King of the Jews and so forth like that on the cross and all that, that's a political execution, right, from the Roman point of view. Right? So the Zealots are the political rebels in the land of Israel in the mid to late first century of the Common Era. So why is this important? Because in 68, the Zealots take forcible control of the Temple Mount. So the Zealots attack the Sadducees and the Pharisees, who are running the sacrificial system and the court system and the Sanhedrin and all the other things that are associated with the Temple Mount complex, which Rome has a garrison there to keep the peace, but Rome's not running that. Rome is in Jerusalem, but they're the military occupiers. The locals are supposed to have control of their own religious affairs. Rome doesn't go in and set up statues on the Temple Mount, right? The way the Greek, the pro-Greek people in the pre-Hasmonean revolt, their own statue in the temple. That was the offense. That's why you had Hanukkah, was in response to that. Rome didn't do that. Rome left the Temple Mount alone, right? But the Zealots took it over because the Zealots wanted to create conflict. Because the Zealots wanted a revolution to throw out Rome.
And the Temple Mount was high, which
It's
gave them
very defensible.
strategic advantage.
Very defensible. The fact that the Zealots' siege of the Temple Mount lasts for as long as it does, a year and a half before the destruction, is astounding. Right? That's astounding. So the actual takeover of the Temple Mount is a Jewish, for lack of a better word, it's not a rabbinic Jewish activity, but it has to do with conflict, right? So then you have testimony to the fact that once Rome starts, the siege of the Temple Mount by Rome on the 17th of Tammuz is against the fortification of the Zealots, right? But then you get into a situation where if Rome is killing Jews, the Jewish population is not going to be happy with that, right? It's not like everybody stood to the side and said, the Zealots, kill them. Go get them, and then we'll get back to business. That's not what was happening because it was a time of turmoil, general turmoil and strife. And so you have some eyewitness that has Rome and the Zealots attacking each other by day, and then the Zealots and the Jews in the Jewish part of the old city attacking each other by night, right? Because there were people within the Jewish population who wanted to get the Zealots off the Temple Mount so you could avoid a massacre, right? So it's a complex time, right? So that's what's going on. Economically, it's a time of relative prosperity, except for the fact that there's war, right? And by the time you get to 68 and 70, the Roman governors have been brutal for quite some time, right? So you've the concept of crucifixions and summary executions, and you have Josephus talking about executions by the thousands, bodies being impaled on stakes lining the road to Jerusalem as a warning against rebels and so forth, this kind of stuff. So that's where we enter the picture. Okay? So what does destruction look like? Let's turn to the second page of the photocopies. Josephus describes the Romans' sack of Jerusalem. And we're going to go to some pretty ugly places here to understand why the 3 weeks that we're living within right now are weeks of sorrow, right? I mean, my daughter yesterday was shopping on Ben Yehuda Street, right? She was having ice cream and laughing with her friends and FaceTiming with her Abba. And how can you look at that during the 3 weeks and think that I should be mourning for Jerusalem. Right? Well, if I only have the evidence of Jerusalem of today, I would certainly think mourning at this time is nonsensical. But if I expose myself to the experience of our people during this time back then, maybe we can have both emotions in our hearts, and see value in it. All right, so let's see what happens. Josephus describes the Roman sack of Jerusalem. This is Wars of the Jews, Book 6. Do people know who Josephus is?
Yes.
I've got some yeses. Anybody say no? Don't be shy. No. Okay, so Josephus is a Jewish general. He's in charge of the northern forces in a rebellion against Rome. And he sees the writing on the wall. They have us outnumbered. His brigade is going to be entirely destroyed. And he does a Benedict Arnold. He surrenders. He saves all of his people. He goes over to the Romans. He says, our side is completely stupid. He's not wrong as far as what happens to our side in the history that follows him. And as a reward, he winds up getting set up with a stipend to write the history of the Jews, the antiquities of the Jews, the wars of the Jews. He gets to live in a villa with dignity in the Roman Empire. And he writes not an objective history of the Jews, but an eyewitness history of the Jews from a highly educated person who is in the know. Right? He certainly is not on the outside looking in. He came from the Jewish population and the Jewish army and Jewish leadership and Jewish nobility. He was wealthy, he was educated, all those things. And then he had full access to Roman society and sources as well. So he's really the best historical source that we have. Everything that comes through Judaism from Mishnah and Talmud has the agenda of our religious goals and our religious interpretations within it. They're not written to be histories in that sense. So if you put the two sources together, both of which are biased, you often wind up with an interesting picture of the land of Israel. Still incomplete, but we'll put them both together. So here's Josephus. So the Romans, who wants to read a little for me? Because none of you had a chance to do this in advance. Chapter 8.
Right, so the Romans being now become masters of the wars, they both placed their ensigns upon the towers and made joyful acclamations for the victory they had gained, as having found the end of this war much lighter than its beginning. For when they had gotten upon the last was, without any bloodshed, they could hardly believe what they found to be true. But seeing nobody to oppose them, they stood in doubt with such an unusual solitude to grieve. But when they went in numbers into the lanes of the city, with their swords drawn, they slew those whom they overtook without mercy, and set fire to the houses whither the Jews were fled, and burned every soul in them, and laid waste a great many of the rest. And when they were come to the houses to plunder them, they found in them entire families of dead men, and the upper rooms full of dead corpses, that is, of such as died by the famine. They then stood in a horror at this sight, and went out without touching anything.
Okay, pause. So when the Romans break through into the Jewish quarter, and they wind up taking over the city after this period of siege, what's the picture that they find?
Desolation.
The people were starving. Okay? The siege that started as a siege of the Temple Mount became a siege of the city itself. And as the Romans were wont to do, nobody in, nobody out, nothing in, nothing out. And people were literally starving to death, the entire population. Okay? There are other stories in Josephus where people who tried to escape were captured and slaughtered on the outside. And there was a whole other piece of this where the Romans, it wasn't just all Roman soldiers, they had Idumeans and others who were hired mercenaries, think Hessians, right, from American history, hired mercenaries, and there's a whole series of things where people, a rumor had gotten out that people who were sneaking out of the city and throwing themselves on the mercy of the Romans had been hiding gold inside themselves. And there's a tremendous slaughter and disemboweling of people by these hired people who basically took all the people who came out and gutted them all, trying to find hidden coins in them, right? That's another documented thing. So imagine the circumstance that you are in, where you are in the city and you're willing to leave the siege The Zealots will kill you if they catch you sneaking out, and you throw yourselves on the mercy of the Romans on the other side, and things are so desperate that, and then you wind up killed anyways on the end. So there was no hope by the end of the siege. It was a devastating siege. Right? So the Roman soldiers find these circumstances. Go on.
But although they had this commiseration for such as were destroyed in that manner, yet had they not the same for those that were still alive. But they ran every one through whom they met with, and obstructed the very lanes with their dead bodies, and made the whole city run down with blood, to such a degree indeed that the fire of many of the houses was quenched with these men's blood. And truly so it happened, that though the slayers left off at the evening, yet did the fire greatly prevail in the night. And as all was burning, came that 8th day of the month, Gorpius, Elul upon Jerusalem, a city that had been liable to so many miseries during the siege, that had it always enjoyed as much happiness from its first foundation, it would certainly have it would certainly have been the envy of the world. Nor did it on any other account so much deserve these sore misfortunes, as by producing such a generation of men as were the occasions of this its overthrow.
All right. Reactions. Well, how does he describe the Romans? Yeah. So when you say Josephus is, gone over to the Roman cause, when he writes, he's not always a review of the Roman, which lends credence, I think, to his historiography. Now, his patrons do no wrong in his history, right? Like the emperors who are his emperors, paying his salary. Those people are all perfect. Their predecessors can be demonized in this way. All right, so let's hear about Titus. Want to go on or a new reader? Go ahead, you're doing great.
Now when Titus was come into this upper city, he admired not only some other places of strength in it, but particularly those strong towers which the tyrants in their mad conduct had relinquished. And when he saw their solid altitude, and the largeness of their several stones, and the exactness of their joints, as also how great was their breadth, and how extensive their length, he expressed himself after the manner following. We have certainly had God for our assistance in this war, and it was no other than God who ejected the Jews out of these fortifications. For what could the hands of men or any machines do towards overthrowing these towers? At which time he had many such discourses to his friends. We also let such go free as had been bound by the tyrants, and were left in the prisons. To conclude, when he entirely demolished the rest of the city, and overthrew its wars, he left these towers as a monument of his good fortune, which had proved his auxiliaries and enabled him to take what could not otherwise have been taken by him.
Okay, so here the question is, what is the physical architecture of the city that he has attacked? What do we see in this passage? Because we usually think, temple, or we're trying to, when we think Jerusalem, unfortunately, we're used to seeing the medieval Muslim walls, right, around the old city, and we think that's what it must have looked like when Rome attacked. But those are not the walls that Rome would have attacked. Those walls were built a millennia later. What is he?
Is there Herod's Tower at one point, sort of you enter?
On the northwest corner of the Temple Mount?
Yes.
Yeah, the garrison building
Yeah,
is still there.
it's pretty sizable, but
Mhm.
it's not that enormous, which
No.
would seem to indicate that the surface, when it was originally built, the surrounding ground would have been lower.
Those buildings are
Perhaps.
probably also medieval reconstructions on
Oh,
top of
okay.
foundation stones from
Uh-huh.
the earlier time. So he's describing something. What does this sound like when he talks about the
Towers.
towers?
Sounds like
When he
a
talks about the
military garrison.
stone, what does it sound like? Anything familiar?
Oh, yeah,
Church.
the way the temple was constructed,
Right.
and the wall itself.
The wall, the supporting wall, right? So Herod's retaining wall for the Temple Mount, which is what we call the Western Wall. The Western Wall, as you know, is not part of the temple. When you go to the Western Wall and you put your hands on it, you say your prayer and all that kind of stuff, you're not touching the ancient temple. You're touching a retaining wall that held up a plateau upon which the temple was built, right? But those stones, especially if you've taken the tunnel tour inside, those stones are massive stones. the precision by which they are cut and laid and the architecture of that time. That's what he's looking at. And there evidently were towers and fortifications made of that size stone, right? So it was not an easy thing for Rome to attack.
Right. So the interesting thing here is when Titus says, "We have certainly had God for our assistant in this war," this is Titus speaking.
He's not talking about our God. Is that the question?
Yeah, it's capitalized
Yeah.
here.
Because it's singular. That's
This is,
chapter 2.
but Josephus's view of Roman theology probably would have been more to emphasize God as a unity, even though they have the statues to all the lesser gods, right? All the pantheon of gods. But they could still talk about, like the Greeks would talk about Zeus as, at this point in history, you could still talk about God. Like you could say God to a Roman, and a Roman could say God to you, and you could intuit that you're actually talking about a one God or a major God or God, and you wouldn't quibble over the fact that there's also other gods,
Okay.
right? So he's using a Jewish word to express Titus's use of a head deity,
Okay.
right? But Titus might not be offering sacrifices to lesser deities. He might have a synthesis of a one God in general, without denying the others. It's not as neat and tidy as we think it is. In Hinduism, this has kind of happened in our generations as well, where there are many people in Hinduism who will talk about God as one God, even though there are the many gods within Hinduism. Okay, anyways, the point is Jerusalem is powerful at the time that it is destroyed by Rome, right? And he sees the destruction of this city as a feather in his cap, and the architecture impressive enough that he leaves the best of it as a testimony to his victory, right? Now, Titus is the one who carries off the menorah, and if you've gone to Rome and you see the Arch of Titus there, and the stone relief on the side, which pictures the Roman soldiers carrying the menorah out of Jerusalem as one of his great conquests. So Josephus is reflecting here that Titus saw this as one of his great victories. And Titus's own arch in Rome testifies to that fact. Clearly he saw this as one of his great victories. Okay? Emperor at the time of the destruction. Okay? He's the emperor of all. So that it has him coming to Jerusalem here and viewing the victory. That's something. All right, now, next, go on.
And now, since his soldiers were already quite tired with killing men,
Poor guys.
and yet there appeared to be a vast multitude still remaining alive, Caesar gave orders that they should kill none but those that were in arms, and oppose them, but should take the rest alive. But together with those whom they had orders to slay, they slew the aged and the infirm. But for those that were in their flourishing age, and who might be useful to them, they drove them together into the temple, and shut them up within the walls of the court of the women, over which Caesar set one of his freedmen, as also Fronto, one of his own friends, which last was to determine everyone's fate according to his merits.
Okay, so they kill everybody who is not of working age, right? I mean, this is like the selection, Lahadil in
That's what
Auschwitz.
got the-
Anybody who is potentially useful, they kept, and everyone else they killed, which is, according to Josephus, contrary to Caesar's orders, right? So he's creating this kind of safe space for Caesar, always a wise thing to do, right? Don't take off Caesar if you want longevity. And he blames it on the soldiers. So they put these guys, and if the temple, the structure of the Temple Mount was roughly a large courtyard rectangle. And the sides of the rectangle were double colonnades, pillar, 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 pillar. If you've been to the Cardo, you get a small sense of that, with a roof over it and a stone wall behind it. And so it would have been a place that you could have actually put people indoors and closed doors and guarded them. It's a place to corral people. So that's what they've done here, is they've corralled the men, and you got somebody who's choosing people according to his merits. These are not his moral merits. This would be, his ability. Okay? So what happened?
So this fronto slew all those that had been seditious and robbers, who were impeached one by another. But of the young men he chose out the tallest and most beautiful, and reserved them for the triumph.
All right, so people are, this infighting, ratting each other out, turning each other in, is even happening here in the imprisoned population. Right? Now, at the end of 3 weeks of starvation or more, who is not a thief?
Who is not a,
Who is not a thief?
they'll probably all be thieves. Food.
Get the food you can, right? I mean, the circumstance that our people would have descended to during the process of this siege and destruction is horrific. Right? Okay? All right, but the handsome young man, the beautiful, he keeps
And
to
as-
parade.
And as for the rest of the multitude that were above 17 years old, he put them into bonds and sent them to the Egyptian mines. Titus also sent a great number into the provinces as a present to them, that they might be destroyed upon their theaters by the sword and by the wild beasts.
Theaters are like the Colosseum, where you have them battle against lions.
But those that were under 17 years of age were sold for slaves. Now during the days wherein Fronto was distinguishing these men, there perished for want of food 11,000, some of whom did not taste any food, through the hatred their guards bore to them, and others would not take in any when it was given to them. The multitude also was so very great that they were in want even of corn for their.
Keep going.
Now the number of those that were captive during this whole war was collected to be 97,000, and as was the number of those that perished during the whole siege, 1,100,000. The greater part of whom were indeed of the same nation with the citizens of Jerusalem, but not belonging to the city itself, for they were come up from all the country to the feast of unleavened bread, and were on a sudden shut up by an army, which at the very first occasioned so great a straitness among them that there came a pestilential destruction upon them, and soon afterwards such a famine as destroyed them more suddenly.
Okay, so the war has created famine and widespread lack of food, agricultural production, etc. The armies need to be fed by something, so they're obviously going to take from the people and the farmers and everything else. People, part out of religious desire, part out of political need. Where does a refugee go? Go to the city. And then part maybe out of political unrest. You have thousands and thousands of people being described here as coming towards Jerusalem and being taken captive, but not cared for, right? And so you have, not just the people who are killed by the sword or the people who starved in the siege, but you have widespread starvation, imprisonment, and further starvation within what you would call refugee camps. So imagine going to a refugee camp outside of a civil war in Eritrea or something like that, and no food. And soldiers from the war surrounding the camp, not letting anyone out. And just wait and see what happens over time. Right? That's also what's happening here.
And disease, pestilence.
Pestilence, disease, right, because typhus and things like that are going to immediately move through. Cholera is going to immediately move through, because there's going to be no sanitation, which means there's going to be no fresh water, so you're going to have,
Cholera.
yeah, that's going to all spread. I mean, it's bad, right? It's bad. So from the time the Zealots take over the Temple Mount in 68 until 70, things are getting uglier and uglier and uglier for everybody, right? So what's the way out?
None.
There's no way out.
Are there Jews other than in Jerusalem?
Yes.
There are
Yeah, the
other-
Jews up in the north aren't doing as bad. There's actually a different governor. The land of Israel, as opposed to the province of Judea, has different areas under different people's control. The north is known for having been a lighter hand, and the people in the north are known for being less rebellious, right? So eventually that's where Judaism is going to land, right? The Mishnah is going to be codified up there in Sipori, right? Beit Shan is a mixed city. We'll see synagogues from the 3rd and 4th century that flourish up in those areas and everything, because those areas were not destroyed in the Jerusalem area, you have no synagogues from the 3rd or 4th century, right? The Jewish settlement in those areas was
Did
utterly
Rome
decimated.
control that area also?
Yes.
But they didn't bother with them.
Rome had a lighter hand, and the Jews up there were less rebellious. They had trouble. I mean, the Bar Kokhba revolution is up there too, in the 130s. You have problems, but it's not this. This is the worst. This is like when you read Eicha about the destruction of the first temple, and you read about people starving and cannibalizing on their own children in the book of Lamentations that we read on Tisha B'Av. This is like that. Both destructions end in this kind of human suffering, starvation, indignity, violence, and slaughter, right? They both end the same way. And it's not an exaggerated tale. This is Josephus, right? Josephus is not invested in making Rome look bad. That's not in his own self-interest at the point where he's writing this. And it has to have resonated true, or it wouldn't have gotten preserved as the official record of the time.
So then one would have to ask the theological question of the time,
Mm-hmm.
which would be Dafka. Why would this particular place, which meant so much and which was our actual connection to God, destroyed in a manner that was so particularly horrific? And what does that mean for that connection?
So theologically, for a people of a covenant with an all-powerful God who centers his focus for us in humanity in the city of Jerusalem,
Why Jerusalem?
how can this happen? Well, go all the way back to King Solomon. Jerusalem is the place that God will turn his attention to when we turn our attention to God in that place. Right? That's the theology of Jewish covenant in Jerusalem. So how does that happen here? So a text that I knew we wouldn't have time to get to, so I didn't bring it today. In 2 sessions, you would have done it today, is Kamsa Bar Kamsa, which is a well-known Talmudic text that talks about a gathering of Jewish people in the home of a powerful, wealthy person, and he has a friend, Kamsa, and an enemy, Bar Kamsa, or friend Bar Kamsa, enemy Kamsa. I forget which one. I don't have it in front of me. And he goes to invite the friend to his public feast, and it's accidentally sent to the enemy, who accepts and comes to the feast with peaceful intent. The Balabite, the head of the feast, sees him and excoriates him and throws him out, embarrassing him in public, and the guy begs to be allowed to stay. Please don't do this. Let me pay for my meal. I won't cause any trouble, etc., etc., etc. The guy is, and it's understood to be sinat chinam. He has just willful hate of this other person. He doesn't care what he's doing to him. He doesn't care if he's Jewish, not Jewish. He doesn't care if he's embarrassed, not embarrassed. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. It's just, I hate you and you get out. That's all he cares about. So the person is thrown out. That person in turn responds in hate. I don't care what happens. I'm going to get that SOB back. And turns them all in on accusations of sedition to the Roman authorities. And the Roman authorities come in and kill them, and the rebellion starts, and it leads to a chain of events that destroys the temple and creates our exile. So in the rabbinic imagination, or in the rabbinic narrative for why all of this happens, the temple is destroyed by senseless hatred, and then, to be honest, you have to say, between Jews. And God allows the temple to be destroyed because of the senseless hatred between us. We lose the right to protection. Right? So that's one answer. Right? That's one answer. So you would draw, why was the temple destroyed? Because of senseless hatred. But the real question is, what would you do? Right? Throw in with the zealots? Fight and at least die going down fighting? Right? Would you be Josephus? This is ridiculous. I'm going to throw in with the winners because my people are going the wrong direction.
Run up north.
Run up north, which brings us to Yochanan ben Zakkai. All right, so turn to the back of the first page. This is from Tractate Gittin. Who would like to read? Is everyone happy with Bonnie? Carol, you're going to read. Carol, from Tractate Gittin, 56a. Abba Sikra. Back of the first page. Go to the first page where the staple is. Turn to the...
Abba Sikra, the head of the Zealots of Jerusalem, was the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's sister.
Okay, so it's good to have mishpacha. So Yochanan ben Zakkai is one of the heads of the rabbinic class of the city of Jerusalem. Is he the head of the Sanhedrin? No, I don't know. He's a primary leader of the rabbinic class, the Pharisees in Jerusalem. We know that this is in some ways a unique movement, by the way, architecturally. We have a thing called the Theodosius stone, western side of the Temple Mount, which is a donor plaque, for lack of a better word, inscribed in Greek, I, Theodosius, the son of a synagogue president, the son of a synagogue president, the term is archsynagogus, do establish this place for pilgrims to come to the city and for the study of the Torah. It actually says that, right? So it's not just a rabbinic myth that we were Torah studying people. At least these people, there's a center with wealth and so forth that's done for this purpose right there by the Temple Mount. You might learn from that, not on the Temple Mount. So it's separate from that complex, but right there and integrated in some way. So we know that there is this activity of Torah study as a major form of identity for people who are gathering in the city, even though they're coming for pilgrimage. Okay? Yochanan ben Zakkai is surely within that milieu of people, and one of the most prominent teachers with students and disciples and so forth from that time. Okay? So this is his sister's son. So Yochanan ben Zakkai's nephew is one of the heads of the Zealots. And now you know who the Zealots are. So Yochanan ben Zakkai is presumably not on the Temple Mount. He's down below, where people are ticked off because the Zealots have taken over the Temple Mount, right? And Yochanan ben Zakkai every night's going home, or whatever, talking to his sister and say, what do you would tell that son, that no good son of yours, to whatever, I don't know. But they've got connection. They're able to talk to each other. They're able to send messages, but not easily. Okay?
How
So
do they get away with all the destruction? You know, the prisoners and everything else?
most of them die. Almost everyone is killed. All right?
The zealots also.
Definitely the Zealots, because they don't leave. But let's read this story and see what happens here. So, go ahead.
Rabbi Yochanan sent him a message. Come privately to me. He came. Yochanan said to him, until when will you do this and fill the world with famine? He said to him, what should I do? Since if I say anything to them, they will kill me.
Pause. Okay? Very interesting interchange. Right? Yochanan ben Zakkai appeals to he's got a family member who's up there as one of the heads. Not the head, but one of the heads. He says, everyone's going to die of famine. What are you doing? Right? And the answer is, I can't stop it now.
Mm-hmm.
They'll kill me. They're zealots. Right? They will kill anybody who tries to go over to the other side.
So in this sentence, since if I say anything to them, they will kill me, he's talking about the Zealots?
He's talking about the
I
zealots.
thought he was talking about the Romans.
Now, you talking about the Romans? I don't know.
No, that's what
No, I don't know.
Maybe. It would make sense that way too. Mine makes a better scene in a movie.
You're the rabbi.
But you can make that argument. I interpret it as internal. But let's see. Go ahead.
He said to him, show me a solution for me, that eternal salvation from.
Ooh, so Yochanan ben Zakkai says, can you get me
Out of here.
out?
He said to him, act as if you're sick, and have everyone come and ask about you, and then bring something putrid, and have it lay with you, and they will say that you have died.
Period. Great plan. So throw up in public a couple of times, fall down faint, have them carry you inside, spread a rumor throughout the town that the great Rabbi Yochanan is deadly ill, then, leave some fish under the bed, and you start to smell like putrid rot, and anybody who comes by is going to think you're just one of the other dead corpses in the town. The concept that you would die of starvation or disease is not far-fetched. It's happening to a lot of people right now. It's not a bad plan. Go on.
And have your students bring you out, and no other men should bring you out, so that we don't become aware that you are light, since they know that a living person is lighter than a dead one.
Yeah, I don't know where that comes from, but but the idea here is that your students will be your pallbearers, as opposed to anybody else who might notice that you're not really dead. Okay?
He did this. Rabbi Eliezer carried him on one side, and Rabbi Yehoshua on the other side. When they came to the opening, the Zealot gatekeepers wanted to stab him.
Right, they want to stab the dead body to make sure it's dead. That's actually a really good idea. He's dead, right? All right, so here we go.
They said to them, the Romans will say they stabbed their
Right. So the students, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, say to the zealots who are guarding the gate, if he comes out stabbed by your knives, the Romans will say the zealots assassinated the leader of the Pharisees. Right? Why would the Romans say that? A, it looks like it, but B,
They want to,
it'll foment more discontent. Every zealot killed by a Pharisee is a zealot that the Romans don't have to kill. Like, if they can foment discontent and divide the Jews against each other, that's going to be in their interest, right? So there's real Machiavellian stuff being discussed here. Go on.
Then they wanted to shake him.
So they said, okay, fine. We're going to toss the body around a little bit.
They said to them, they will say they shook their
Right, they're going to say they disrespected the corpse of the great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, as if they had spit or done something else on the body to show disrespect. Right? You can't. So.
They opened the gate. He went out.
Right. I always wondered why are they letting Eliezer and Yeshua out? These guys are alive and well, and out they walk. Right? But okay, fine. For Kavod HaMeit, for the sake of the funeral procession, they let these guys carry the body out. Now, what's going to happen?
When Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai reached there, the Roman king, he said, greetings to you, the king.
He stands up, Shalom Aleichem! Long live the king! Now, here's the problem. Vespasian is the Roman general in charge of the sacking of Jerusalem. He is not Caesar. He is not the king. Yochanan ben Zakkai gets up out of the coffin, stands up, and says, long live King Vespasian. Hail Caesar. Go ahead.
Vespasian said to him, you are liable for 2 death penalties. One, because I am not a king, and yet you will call me king. And furthermore, if I am a king, why did you come to me until now?
Right. I'm not the king, so you're insulting Caesar and you deserve death penalty for sedition. Or, if you do think I've been Caesar all this time, what have you been doing in there instead of following my orders? So that's also sedition and would also be death penalty. I don't think you could be liable for both. It's one or the other in this case because they're mutually exclusive. But okay.
Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai said to him, as for what you said about yourself, I am not a king. In truth, you are a king, if not now, then in the future.
So he's got a crystal ball.
And as for what you said with your second comment, if I am a king, why didn't you come to me until now? There are zealots among us who did not allow us to do this. In the meantime, as they were talking, a messenger.
Okay, pause. Okay, so he answers both questions. You're not the king, but you're not Caesar, but you will be one day. That's an outlandish claim. right? Hang on.
A flattering one.
Very flattering. That's not a bad thing to say to somebody. You would make a great Caesar.
Yeah, but also the power structure, he could be somewhere in the lineup, so it's, you know, good possibility.
I mean, it's a risk, because if Titus hears it, Titus will execute him for this. But is he really in a more dangerous circumstance by playing this card than he was 5 minutes before he played this card? Hard to argue that he puts himself in more danger. There's no more danger than the danger he's in. There's no way he can make this worse. Right? So he plays that card. The second card he plays is, those darn zealots won't let me out. Which is tremendously ungrateful to the nephew who hatched this entire plan and is the one who got him out.
Yes.
Right? So he throws his nephew under the bus, who obviously isn't going to survive. He's going to be killed in the siege. Right? So what do you think of Yochanan ben Zakkai right now at this moment?
Yeah,
It's
so
clever.
I was thinking smart.
Smart.
Smart?
Gutsy.
Gutsy?
What about the pallbearers?
If I said his name was Benedict Arnold, would you be saying the same thing? Gutsy, smart, clever, look at this guy?
The pallbearers that carry him.
Yeah.
They're getting out.
Eliezer
too.
Yoshua, these are the smartest guys in the story. No risk, all the benefit. Right? Fair enough. Anyone want to be critical?
I want to know how.
Well, he's leaving the rest.
How
How did he pop out?
they
And
they
back to the
they
king
carried
when his-
the body out of the gates across, and the Roman soldiers are there. So the Roman soldiers halt in the name of Caesar. And he stands up takes off his death shrouds and says, I'm Yochanan ben Zakkai, I'm the head of the Pharisees, I would like to speak with Vespasian. He's going to get to speak to Vespasian, right? The zealots have held siege. Nobody in, nobody out. Somebody in a different party got out and wants to talk to Vespasian. That's going to happen. It's in Vespasian. If he doesn't like what he has to say, he'll kill him. But it's in his interest to listen to what this guy has to say. Maybe there's a break in the siege. Maybe there's an opportunity. Maybe there's, right? This would be a welcome development from the Roman point of view. Okay? What else? Go on.
Messenger Aristocra arrived from Rome and said to him, Rise, for the emperor has died, and the noblemen of Rome plan to appoint you as their leader and make you the next emperor.
While Yochanan ben Zakkai is standing right there. The words are 3 sentences old, and the messenger comes in and pronounces Vespasian emperor-elect. Now,
So it
yeah, it's either he's the luckiest guy in the history of time, or he knew something, or God is at work.
Yeah.
I think those are your only 3 interpretations. You're welcome to any one of them, right? He's the luckiest man in the history of... Oh, you could say the story is made up. That's the 4th one, if you want. All right? So, but unlikely, right? You can't make this up.
Well, actually,
Right.
You could, but people would know it's a lie.
there's another version of this story elsewhere in the literature, because I learned it.
Yeah.
And in that version of it, he was not taken out in a shroud, he was taken out in a box.
Yes, in a coffin,
Yeah.
right. I mistakenly used that language a moment ago, but here he's being carried. There he's in a box with multiple disciples. But the outcome's the same. The difference in that story, by the way, is also how far away he is. In that one, he gets through the Roman lines into safety, gets out of the box, and travels to where Vespasian is. This seems to position Vespasian as right there on the Mount of Olives or something in the middle of the siege. Not clear that that's real. This version may have collapsed some of the facts to streamline the telling of the story. Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So Yochanan ben Zakkai now has Vespasian's undivided attention. Right? Instant credibility. However this comes to be, at this point, you don't want to just ask for a day off. You've got leverage. Right? In the ancient world, the kind of endorsement of the gods that this seems to show in the presence of the man who will now be the all-powerful Caesar, he can have anything he wants, without looking ahead or knowing what you know, what should he ask for?
Peace for his people.
Mercy on Jerusalem. Isn't that what he should ask for?
Well, he doesn't like the zealots, so I'm not so sure.
But his nephew's one of them, who had no argument with him. His nephew said, some of them will kill me, but there must be others like his nephew. There's no attempt by Yochanan ben Zakkai to mitigate what's about to happen to
Well,
Jerusalem.
He knows what will work and what won't. He knows that's not gonna happen.
Okay, so if he is a crystal ball guy with the prophecy, and that's how he knows, and then he knows there's no way to avoid it, he's off the hook, there's no moral dilemma, get what you can, get a little salvation, like he says in the opening of the story. Let's save something. And maybe he knows that the little thing that he saves will be enough to save all of us one day. Which of course it is, because here we are. So he's not wrong. But at that moment, you have to feel, in my mind, a dilemma. He doesn't ask for Jerusalem. He doesn't ask for mercy.
Unless, if you're thinking about the fate of all of the human beings in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Which is where I think you are. That's one thing. If you are thinking about the temple and its practices, I think it's realistic to suspect that he may think that's played out.
Maybe. If Yochanan ben Zakkai thinks that the temple's days are done and Torah is the future of the covenant, which is contrary to every piece of rabbinic theology for the next 500 years, to always go back, rebuild, go back, rebuild, go back, rebuild, then that would explain what he's doing. I mean, I would have hoped that he at least says, okay, kill the zealots, but leave the building alone. You know, something. But nothing. But there's nothing. So what does he ask for? Go on, Carol.
He asked for Yavna.
Carol, go ahead.
Rabbi Yosef read the following verse about him.
Oh, did we? No, go back, go back.
That's the most famous quote.
Before okay. Vespasian then said to Rabbi Yochanan ben
I
Zakkai,
will be going to Rome to accept my new position, and I will send someone else in my place to continue besieging the city and waging war against it. But before I leave, ask something of me that I can give you. Yavna and its sages, and do not destroy it, and spare the dynasty of Rabban Gamliel. And lastly, give me doctors to heal Rabbi Saba.
so what does he do? He locks down the Pharisees, the rabbis. Rabban Gamliel of the house of Hillel, who becomes the house of Yehuda Hanasi and the Mishnah. That's the family of leadership he preserves. He doesn't say, give me Herod and Herod's line so a Hasmonean can sit on the throne again. He doesn't say, give me the temple so that the sacrificial system can be observed in covenant with our God. He doesn't say, give me the leadership and I will be faithful to you as your ruler of Judea. He says, give me a yeshiva with the line of Hillel the sage, and my students can continue in peace.
So it's the chain of tradition from the men of the Great Assembly.
Yep.
Going all the way back to
Yep.
Moshe.
Yes.
Which is the validity of Torah
Right.
forever and ever.
So he asked to preserve the line of Torah tradition that's in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot.
Right.
Okay? To the men of the Great Assembly and down to his time. Rav Yosef, go ahead.
Rav Yosef read the following verse about him. Some say that it was Rabbi Akiva who applied the verse to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. I am the Lord who turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge blue. Isaiah, as he should have said to him, to lead the Jews alone this time. And why did Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai make this request? He maintained that Vespasian might not do that much for him, and there would not even be a small amount of salvation. Therefore, he made only a modest request in the hope that he would receive at least that much.
He asked for the minimum, the maximum he thought he would get, the minimum he needed, To save
Torah.
Torah
Judaism.
study.
Torah Judaism. Yes.
Before Vespasian asks him what he wants, he says, someone else will come and keep the war going.
Right.
That didn't seem-
Yeah, he says this war is going on, but you can ask me for anything you want. So evidently peace is not one of the options. Right. But he doesn't even try. All right. So, I'm so glad we had this time together. Tanit 30b-4 at the beginning. So what is the story for us? We leave Jerusalem in ruins and Torah in our hands, which becomes the birth of our form of Judaism. The way we live, the way we observe, what we hope for, eventually becomes tefillah, it becomes amidah, it becomes shema, it becomes keeping kosher in the manner that we know, it becomes rabbinic study and authority, it becomes Mishnah, it becomes Talmud. All the things that become us only come through this carrying of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai through the Zealot gate. It's a very narrow opening from which all subsequent Jewish history comes. What we are would not have been except for that 5 minutes arguing with the guard not to jostle the body. Right? All bets are off if that didn't work. You talk about going through the Pale in Eastern Europe and that being a narrow opening through which so much of Judaism goes in and there's destruction and survival. This is a person. And the whole world is a very narrow bridge. This is a very narrow bridge. So what is that? So that is miracle. That is faith. That is hope. But it's also smart, right? And conniving and risky and he's leaving a lot behind.
Excuse me, it seems to me that if we talk about the quality of resilience in the face of destruction,
Yep.
and we see this quality as necessary not only throughout history, but particularly now, the need for resilience, that Plan B needs to be framed in consonance with a critical value. If you don't have a critical value to guide you and that to reach for, your Plan B will not be strong enough to save you. And Yochanan ben Zakkai had, his Plan B was infused with value and with hope.
And one other thing, you have to believe in something, and you need to believe in it over and against everything else if you're going to survive when everything is being destroyed. Notice one other thing, though. In the moment that he saves Torah, he doesn't save a Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Story could have put a Torah underneath him. Snuck it out. It's not there.
Would have made him heavier.
But we bury the righteous with Torah scrolls. It would have, it's very easy for that to be part of the story. You think he didn't have a Torah scroll?
Why is that significant that he did not ask for that?
Because he is Torah. By saving him, the chain of tradition, the study house, Hillel, Gamliel, that is saving Torah. They are the Torah people, right? They themselves are the living Torah. Their life becomes living Torah, right? And so the emphasis here is that it is the person of Torah who needs to be saved,
Not the Torah itself.
not the Torah itself.
But surely there were other Sifrei Torah in
Yeah.
the area.
They're going to write one. He's going to go to Yavne. They're going to write a Torah. Any one of these three guys has the ability to write a Torah from heart. They don't need a tikkun to write a Torah.
Yeah, but it took until Ezra and Nehemiah to get it back, right?
Well, before them. That's before them. Yeah. All right. Last piece.
Chances to bring a Torah, and that could mix things up.
I guess. I just always thought it was an interesting.
Yes, it is. That's interesting.
absence from the story. Since the entire point is to form a yeshiva, but there's no Torah scroll in the story. Now, it might not be there because this is a true story, and it's just not what they did. Like, he might be sitting here and go, oh, crap. What was I thinking? You know? All right, Tani, 30b. We'll finish with this. The sages say, whoever performs labor on the 9th of Av and does not mourn for Jerusalem will not see her future joy. As it is stated, rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad with her, all who love her. Rejoice for joy with her, all who mourn for her. And here it is stated, whoever mourns for Jerusalem will merit and see her future joy, and whoever does not mourn for Jerusalem will not see her future joy. This is also taught in a Baraita, whoever eats meat or drinks wine in the meal before the 9th of Av, about him the verse says, and whose iniquities are upon their bones, because the terror of the mighty was in the land of the living. So we leave with this austere closing that having hope without taking yourself to a place to experience as best you can despair, destruction, where our people were, to only love Ben Yehuda the way it is and not see behind it the haunting of the way it was, is to miss the point, right? And to think that maybe we're where we're supposed to be, which is obviously not yet, because we're still praying for the Jerusalem that was promised, which we still don't have, right? So destruction and resilience does come from hope, but it comes from a place of deep experience and pain, which should never be forgotten. It comes from having a core faith about what is the most important thing in the world that will continue us going, and that was understood to be Torah, Torah people, and Torah lives. And a certain sense of it's going to be okay, right? Even here, there's a way out. You can't save the world, but you can save a little piece. So you have to figure out what's the little piece that you have the ability to save, right? And the rest of it's going to hell. But that's not for despair, and that's not for zealotry and conflict and going down fighting. Compromise, get realistic, find a piece that you can save. World. Right? It's an amazing moment in our history.
Can I just ask one question?
And then I have to go because I have to pick up a kid.
Okay. At the time this story happened,
Yeah.
there was...
The story, meaning Masechet Gittin, or the events in the
No,
story?
the events in the story.
Okay.
There was a yeshiva in Yavne.
Yes.
Flourishing yeshiva.
Yeah, they're already there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always wondered what the Rosh Yeshiva in Yavne thought about this Give Me Yavne thing.
As I recall, the exact quote is Tainli Yavne ve'etai yeshiva. You know, so that,
Yeah, Give Me Yavne and its study house.
so